Fantastic. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope everyone can hear me, just as I've got a hedge cutter going right by the window. So hopefully that will, this is its second time going past, so hopefully it'll be finished in a minute. But welcome, welcome, Martin. So great to see you on here. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thanks. It's really good to be here, and yeah, an exciting thing for me because I'm back on Clubhouse, and that's not a place that many people hear me speak. So it's yeah, good to be on a different platform.
Oh, fantastic! Well, we have a good little following. A fair few rock up at the time live, but obviously the great thing about Clubhouse is that it can be listened on the replay, and then also as we were discussing, this also goes on to my YouTube channel. So guys, if you are not already on subscribing to my YouTube, because it's a bit of a chicken and egg at the moment. As we get more subscribers, we get more videos, and I really need to push ahead with the subscribers. It's not cool to have more videos than subscribers, I don't think. So that's classic there, isn't it? But yeah, thank you so much. I can see we've already got lots of people jumping on, and also some really experienced people, so that is great. So what we will do is we will kick off with introducing Martin Rapley, who I have been, gosh, I've known Martin for, I'm thinking it's even longer, Martin, maybe even 3.5 years, maybe 4. I certainly met Martin when he was running a PIN meeting. He's written a book, a refurbishment handbook, which I have put the link to. So guys, do go and take that link. But that was an absolute eye-opener for me in understanding a little bit more about refurbishments and doing those. So that's how I know Martin. And we also still, all these years later, since we're all back in the room, we now are go to another networking event together. So we've actually started seeing each other a bit more again, which is really great. So Martin, I wonder if you could just give us a brief introduction to yourself, to anyone who doesn't know you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. So my background is actually construction. I left school, worked for a building contractor, originally as a quantity surveyor. That's the person who looks after the finances for building contractors. That drifted into me becoming a contractor's project manager. So I'd worked for contractors for 20-something years. I then set up my own construction business. And just through the way things went, I found that most of my clients were property investors. Someone then said, well, if you go along to this property investing meeting, you'll meet even more clients that want builders. And that's exactly what I did. And that was, I went to that first meeting in May 2012 as a manager of a building business looking for clients. And very quickly, I realized that whilst there were lots of property investors out there, a lot of them were making mistakes that they didn't know they were making, and I had the answers. I had the knowledge that they needed, and you know, it was a real eye opener for me that there was this whole business of property investing going on, and yet no one really seemed to be helping property investors with the mechanics of managing of refurbishment. And so in 2013, I wound up my construction business and became a consultant for property investors. And that's when I went on some training courses. I went on a one-day training course to find out what property investing was and what property investors were taught about refurbishment, which of course on a one-day course was nothing at all. It was all about how to find property and how to stack up some creative deals. I'd taken Sarah, my wife, along with me. And she was in a bit of a dead-end job at the time. So she said, well, look, we could use property investing to get her out of her job and me create a business. And that's exactly what we did. We got Sarah out of her job by the end of 2013.
Wow.
And I created a business as a consultant. A lot of property investors then said to me, Martin, we can't afford you as a consultant on a small refurbishment. You know, if you're doing it, you know, and I work on bigger blocks of flats and things, it justifies a consultant. And they said, Martin, can you start doing some training? And in 2016, I was persuaded to run a one-day training course. And yeah, loved it. Just loved the buzz of helping people immediately. And that's where we were. We were running one-day training courses. COVID came, and of course, we weren't allowed to meet up face-to-face. Everything went online. Everything became a platform. And so since then, everything I've been doing, has been online. We do everything on Facebook and in Zoom. And we'll come on to some more of that later on. But that's kind of how I came to where I am now. But I am now a property investor. I've got a portfolio mostly in Kent of HMOs and flats. We're out regularly looking and working in property investing circles, but still training, still working as a consultant.
Amazing. So just from just a bit about your property background before we jump into the sort of refurbishment side of things. So you said that you have HMOs and flats. So what made you kind of, some people don't know, I'm serviced accommodation. Some people just love a good buy to let. What made you move into the HMO and flat space?
Well, so the first thing to say is in 2013-14, when we were doing trading, there was no such thing as SA. Service accommodation was not a strategy that was mentioned. So when it came to good cash flow strategies, HMOs was the good cash flow strategy, really. Rent to rent didn't work for us because we didn't want to be hands-on managing tenants. We knew from day one, me particularly, I wanted more of a lifestyle business. I'd much rather be talking to you and the listeners now than worrying about whether someone's stolen someone else's sausages or something like that. So we leave that for agents to deal with. So HMOs was the high cash flow. The reason we've gone for flats as well is really the flats are the long-term strategy. The flats are the retirement strategy. We tend to look for small blocks of flats where we can add some value, because everything I do, of course, has got refurbishment attached to it. And then we'll hold some, we'll sell some, we'll hold some whole blocks. And so that's the retirement strategy. In 10, 15 years' time, it will just be a whole portfolio of small blocks of flats, really.
So do you buy the whole block of flat up front, or is it something that you bought flats here, there and everywhere and it's resulted in a few coming up for sale and you've then purchased them? Or was it always the block of flats up front? Yeah,
we've always bought the block of flats, or as much of the block. So we've got the freehold and some flats in the block. The most recent purchase, the back end of last year, the last one we bought was actually a block of 4 flats. 2 had been sold off on long leases, so we've got 2 flats and we've got the freehold. So it's not. We'd like to buy whole blocks of flats. It's what comes up and what's available, and we wouldn't not buy another HMO. So that's what we're still looking at. But we're also looking at single let houses as well, really, now, because we are looking at things for the longer term as much as the cash flow for the short term.
And in fact, that reminds me, you are involved in Dan Hill, the official property entrepreneur. I follow his podcast a lot. I know there's some fellow people that are in there, Chris and Sen, and I know he talks a lot about, doesn't he, when you first starting off, you tend to go into what he calls as noisy businesses. So it might require a lot of kind of work, like serviced accommodation would be the height of a noisy business, so to speak. Lots of things going on, lots of moving parts, high return, but it can be a bit volatile. So, for those of you, when COVID hits, or if you're in a like a leisure area, you can have major impacts. Whereas, that long-term retirement plan is to have things where you have a lot of equity in very stable, non-noisy businesses, such as, it might be buy to let, but more likely it'll be, what do you call it, like guaranteed rent schemes, all of that kind of thing on a long-term lease. So it becomes, so is that kind of like the plan that you have in place then?
Yeah, absolutely. And we learned that working with Dan. I've been working with Dan now 2.5 years, although I knew him beforehand. And our realization primarily was that we didn't have steady cash coming in month on month. We had some cash from our properties, without any doubt, but it wasn't enough for us to live on. And we were very reliant on my consultancy work, which was determined by factors outside of my control. It was determined by a client deciding that they wanted to do a refurbishment and they needed a consultant. But then we're all ready to go, and then there's suddenly a funding problem, and so the project doesn't start for another 3 months, or a project we thought was going to start to get stuck in planning. And so my income was really peaks and troughs. We had this steady income that was, not enough to live on, and then we would spike it, and then it would be back in negative. And so what Dan's helped us understand really is how to try and smooth that out. And that's much more relating to my online training and memberships. And we had a subscription going for a long time. It's not quite how it works now. But the online training is all about smoothing that out, adding more property in, and then the consultancy, which is great, I can spike it. But the consultancy's not where I want to be long term, because that takes time and clients phone say, oh Martin, I've just had this idea, can you tell the builder this, or we've just found this, and can you go down to site tomorrow and deal with it? Which is, I like doing, but that's not a retirement lifestyle. That's not a lifestyle I want in the longer term. I want to really be spending more time helping property investors getting things right with their projects, and just passing on my what is rapidly heading towards 40 years of experience.
Amazing, incredible. Well, let's excuse me, let's jump into it then. So obviously this came up as a need, as things often do. You could see that there was I suppose a gap in the market, and I think you're so right. I remember when I did my first training courses, and then I went to see some properties that needed some refurbs, and I was just thinking, and you hear all the horror stories, and that's when I met you. I bought your book. It was kind of like one of those serendipitous things. And then literally I remember me having a word and said, look, I've read the book, Martin, and I'm going to the viewing next week, and it was for an investor. And I said, and I need to get this schedule of works, and you were like, yeah, that's right, Emma, go ahead. And then that the comparison of of your builders is all going to be the same. So that was kind of my initial intro. So when you have seen all of these things over the years, what would be for a newbie or somebody who is new to refurbs or anything like that, and maybe they may have done refurbs on their own property, but I think it's very different, isn't it? When you do it with your own property, there's a lot of heart in there. You might spend extra because you might want a nicer tap or all of those things, but when it comes back to investment, it is just that, isn't it? You are investing your own cash or somebody else's cash, and so therefore you want to get the best return on your investment. So what are kind of those initial things that going back to the question. So what are those, for those first people, what are the first steps they may do in getting this kind of knowledge? How can you help them with that?
Well, so I mean, I've got a whole stack of videos. You're welcome to look me up on YouTube. I've got about 1,100 subscribers on YouTube. Actually, have a look at Refurbishment Mastery, which is just a whole bunch of little 5-minute snippet type videos of things to be thinking about and things to consider. And Refurbishment Mastery, on Facebook as well is where I am. And then for those that you're obviously welcome to buy the book that Emma's talking about. There's we're on to the second edition now. You've probably got the original edition, but we're on to a second edition, which just brings it up to date a little bit more. And the thing about the way I talk, and it's the same with the book, is it's not investment strategy specific. It is what I talk about is a process that will work with anything that you're going to do. Whatever it started with and whatever it ends up with, it will work. So if you're buying a house to convert to an HMO, or you're buying a flat to convert for SA, or if you're going to buy a commercial building to convert to something else, it absolutely all works. And it starts with this whole concept of who is actually going to live in this property or use this property when it's finished? And you might say, oh, well, I'm going to rent it out as, I'm going to use it as SA. People are going to, come and use it for their weekend breaks, or they're going to use it whilst they're working in the town. But it's like, well, let's go deeper than that. If they are working in the town, where are they working? What are they going to be expecting to use it for? Because only when we know what we're going to use it for can we start saying, right, therefore, this is what the specification becomes. We don't want to be spending money on, at the extreme, gold-plated taps if chrome taps serve the purpose of the people that are going to be living in. But in turn, we don't want to be valuing our property as Buckingham Palace standard, aiming to do everything on the cheap. So I encourage everyone to think about what is the avatar of the person that is going to live in the property. And I guess, not being an expert on SA, that's probably a little bit wider than it would be than, say, someone who's converting into an HMO. They know probably get a much better idea as who's going to live there. Whereas from an SA perspective, you've probably got a little bit more.
Well, I think if we sort of deep dive a bit more into that. So with serviced accommodation, so we really have three main kind of avatar guests, I suppose. You've got contractors, leisure guests, and corporates. So the corporates, you want it to be just a little bit nicer, but that could be things like a bean to cup coffee machine, those kind of things. Contractors, very much what I would call kind of Premier Inn type thing, basic, but still looks really nice, very, very comfortable. And then obviously leisure guests, they would, a level of leisure guests would be perfectly happy to stay in the contractor accommodation. Totally different if we're talking about, cottage, ancient cottage by Babbling Brook. We probably won't go down that route. But if we were just to look at, say, a contractor that needs something really lovely, I think, Martin, you've seen maybe our hotel. It's basically white walls, some blocks of colour. It's basic, but it looks, it's got an impact. It looks great. There are some, what we tend to go for more expensive where there's more use, if you know what I mean, and less expensive where there's less use, so to speak. But yeah, if we were to consider, so let's say we've got a property and it's going for service to, for those kind of contractors.
So we've got an idea then as to what we're trying to achieve, and you've said reasonably basic, but to a nice standard travel lodge type. So now we've got this idea of what we're trying to achieve. We can now work backwards and say, well, the cost of achieving that with this particular building we've got, the condition it's in or the use that it's currently got, we now know what we've actually got to spend to get there. And again, this is an eye-opener for some people I work with. With that knowledge of where we're going to get to and what we want to achieve, and perhaps what that value will be as well from an end financing perspective, we can now work out the cost of doing the work to get us there. We've got other costs associated with that. And so now we can say, based on all of that information, this is how much we can buy the property for. And a lot of property investors, come from the other end. They say, well, it's on the market for 200,000. I can do a bit of a deal and get it for 185. Aren't I clever? Well, not if 185 doesn't make the numbers work for you. And so you've got to kind of know your financing. You've got to know your cost to get there. And sadly, I talk to so many property investors that have already bought a property and have already made a loss. And I could tell you some horror stories. A lady I was talking to only a few weeks ago, she bought a property to convert into flats. I know it's not service accommodation. She bought it to convert into flats. And when we ran the numbers, before she even starts, she is at minus £160,000. Oh. Because she's paid, because the cost of converting this building into flats is fixed. The cost of the end value of these flats is fixed. The only figure that can change is the purchase price. And she's paying, well, 160,000 more than break even. And if she wants to make a profit, you know, 400,000 pounds more than she should have done.
Gosh.
And sadly, that a lot of people are doing that because they're not starting with the end. And in fact, that's something, you know, going back to Dan Hill. Dan Hill talks about starting with the end in mind. You've got to know where you're aiming to, and then from that work backwards. And if you've got the right money in the budget to do the work, then now you're not buying or paying for the cheap builder that's going to give you shoddy work. You can actually afford to pay for the right builder that's going to deliver the project, the builder that's got enough resources to turn the work round in 2 months instead of 8 months, the builder that's not going to rip you off, and that you actually end up having a really good relationship with, and then comes and does the next project with you and the next project with you. And you know, that is where I aim for people to get to, really. You've got the money in the budget to do things properly. And if you can't do things properly, then unfortunately what it means is you didn't buy the property at the right price in the first place.
Yeah, that's really very, very interesting. And and that's something I've really learned over the years is, you know, there are times when a deal doesn't work, and if you start notching away at your margins, and as you say, having that professionalism in there, which I think people do tend to do up front. You know, we've certainly been guilty of it at times, but it's ensuring that we don't want a headache for the whole time, do we? This is not a kind of a secondary job that just, you start ripping your hair out or you get ill over. We don't really want that. We want to really ensure that we move forward in a really positive way. So you kind of given us, so the end in mind, that's absolutely great, and understanding how it all works out. So I know that you kind of follow some sort of processes. So obviously we can buy your book and all of those kind of things, but can you just sort of talk us through that sort of basic process of understanding how to go ahead with say a refurb project or a kind of conversion?
Yeah, absolutely. So and this is what the book covers this, and in fact I've got a blueprint. My project management blueprint has got 83 checkpoints in it for clients that really want to learn how to be project managers. But breaking that down, I think there's 4 elements to making a successful project. And if you can get these 4 elements right, you're already well over 90% of the way there. And the rest is the icing on the cake and the cream, and comes with experience. Martin,
just 1 second. I think your headphones are knocking on your phone. Just watch out that they're not knocking on your phone. It was a funny noise going on there.
Yeah, that's probably me moving around, getting too excited.
Keep going, we're loving it.
So those 4 elements, we've already touched on the first one. The first element is get the appraisal right, understand what you're trying to achieve and get the figures right. The second part of it is to have a clear and concise schedule of works, which is something you touched on earlier on. And importantly, thinking through that schedule of works and being part of the creation of that schedule of works. Even if you're not writing it, at least driving it, and importantly, not leaving it to the builder. If you have got a certain demographic in mind as to who's going to, be a guest in your service accommodation, apart hotel, then it's your business to ensure that your builder delivers what you want. You don't just say to the builder, well, build an integrated cupboard in that corner. You tell them, I want a cupboard that is this size with this style door on it, and I want a hanging rail on the left-hand side, and I want 3 shelves on the right-hand side, and I need a drawer at the bottom where I can put spare blankets, or that kind of thing, to suit your business and your user of that particular room. Whereas if you left it with a builder, who knows what you might get. And so the schedule of works is really important, is that next thing, to ensure that not only do you get what you want, but also you've got a chance that all of the builders, when you approach several different builders to carry out the work, they're all now delivering the same scope of works. They are pricing for the same thing. They're not having to guess what you want and make assumptions. They're actually giving you a price for what you want. So now we've got 3 or 4 competitive prices that are totally comparable in front of us. The next thing, and I've touched on this already, the next most important thing is actually finding the right builder, the best builder. And I've described them as the right builder and the best builder. I have not described them as the cheapest builder. We're not in the market of the cheapest builder. Sometimes the cheapest builder is the right one and the best one, but we should, and price is always important, but we shouldn't be looking to go with the wrong builder, which sometimes is the cheapest builder. And I encourage everyone to be really critical when you're engaging with builders that may be working with you. When you're looking for them, be critical and be brave and say no to them when they're not right. If you meet a builder, let's say you meet a builder at the property and you walk them around and you've given them the schedule of works, and you get talking to them and you think, oh my word, this bloke's going to wind me up, I want to punch him on the nose, then even if their price is brilliant, don't work with them. You're going to have a business relationship with this builder for the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months or so. You don't want to be having that relationship with someone that you want to punch on the nose every time you meet them. So be brave and be critical, and the way to ensure that you've got enough builders to potentially give you prices is to start with way more in the first place. Maybe you're talking to 10, 12 builders in the first place, whittling that down to 7 or 8 that are going to price. One then goes on holiday, one forgets, one decides he doesn't want it, and now at least we've got 3 or 4 prices in front of us, and they're all comparable. So number 3 is getting the right builder, not always the cheapest builder. And then number 4 is this whole concept of managing the project, and that you can't delegate the management of the project to the builder. The builder will have a project manager in many cases, not all cases, but a lot of them will have a project manager. But that project manager's role, or that builder's role of managing the build work, is managing the building work. And I was in that role for many, many years. And believe me, even though my clients believed I was looking after their interests as number 1, I wasn't. I was looking after my interests as number 1, and my boss's interests as number 1, and my client as number 2. And I was probably I definitely was making suggestions to my clients that made my life easier and helped me make more money, because that's how I was working. And so now I'm on the other side. I'm saying this is how builders are working. And importantly, the process of project managing a scheme actually starts the day you find the scheme, potentially months before a builder's anywhere near it. And it's you that finds the scheme, it's you that works out that end demographic, it's you that specifies what you need, and therefore it's you that's got to manage the building project. And you manage the builder's manager if necessary, and then it's you that finds the letting agent or the tenants or sets it up for the guests, you that brings the furniture, all of those things to get it. And so there's a whole process here of management. And if you want to manage, then accept that you're a project manager. If you can't do that, you haven't perhaps got the skills, you don't want to do that, maybe you've got a full-time career running another business, then you need to look at outsourcing that job to someone else. And there's a cost attached to that, in which case that cost needs to be factored into your original appraisal. If you haven't got the time to manage that through from end to end, then factor in that cost for someone else to do it. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up to fail immediately. And I, sadly, a lot of property investors come to me after things have gone wrong because they haven't really understood what they should do, or they haven't got the time. Or I have clients come to me and they say, Martin, can you help me put some contract documents together? My builder's going to start next week. And we've got, I spend an hour or two untangling a mix-up they're in, where the builder thinks he's working to one set of terms and conditions, and the employer thinks he's working to something else. And I've got to make sure they're on the same page. The builder thinks he's getting paid every Friday, and the employer thinks he's getting paid at the end of every month. And, they're not in the same place. And that's what happens when you haven't necessarily got the right knowledge, the right skills, or the right or enough time to get things right in the first place.
Well, that's
they're the four things really.
Yeah, and I really love what you talk about there, is this taking this responsibility. So a lot of times I talk to people who are starting off their service accommodation journey, and they might they're thinking, oh, where might I do it? And they might speak to a management agent or a property sourcing agent, and they'll ask their advice. And I'm always like, no, you've got to do your research and do your due diligence, so that they can be, the discussion with them can be part of that due diligence, of course, but you've got to go with that knowledge. So like you said, when you're talking to the builder, it's important that you go with a certain amount of knowledge, or take somebody with you who's got more knowledge than you, so that you can have those great meetings, so to speak. So just going back, because I know this is a really big one. So you've spoken about, one, your kind of appraisal, understanding the figures are correct to enable you to even go ahead and purchase. And then two, having this kind of clear and concise schedule of work. So how might you understand, because the appraisal, that's right up front. So that's generally, even before you've had a builder out on this kind of project. So do you work at a sort of a bag packet per square meter per project? Is that how you work it out for that initial appraisal? What advice would you give people for that initial appraisal level?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So that the initial appraisal, the challenge with these appraisals is that it is almost impossible to put indicative prices per square metre or per square foot against them. You can do that with new build projects, but with conversions and refurbishments, as you'll appreciate, every building starts off differently. Even two houses next door to each other start off in a different condition. And every building ends up differently at the end. So the only way to do an appraisal is by breaking the work down into manageable chunks that we can understand and put a realistic price against. So the extreme is we've got a flat and we want to refurbish it for service accommodation. Well, that's a grey area, because we don't know, what we're starting with, what we're finishing with. But now we're saying, right, actually, we've got this flat, and actually we know it needs a complete rewire. Right, well, we can say, well, there's a manageable chunk that's going to cost £2,500, £3,000 for a rewire. And whilst we're there, we also know we need to do some plaster repairs. So, we can put a budget against that, and we're going to do some painting, and we're going to put in a new kitchen. We know how much that might cost to buy, and we know how long that's going to take to install, and we're going to put in a new bathroom, so we can work that out. So we break the project down into meaningful chunks that we can understand. And when we put sensible budgets against them, some of those figures are going to be a little bit high, some of them are going to be a little bit low, but across the board, they're generally going to be in the right place. And putting these figures together, I encourage every property investor to learn what these costs are. And in fact, I teach property investors how to put the costings together. And we do it on real live jobs, projects that they've been to see and understand.
And where might they find that kind of detail? Is that literally as much as, calling up LNPG, for instance, and, finding out what a kitchen would cost? Speaking to your local plumber? I mean, this is obviously quite overwhelming for somebody who's new into this.
Yeah. So the best place to get it from is to book a call with me on a real live job, and I'll take you through typical figures. Right. That is the best way of doing it, and that takes about 2 hours to do, by the way. So it's some good in-depth training that I provide there. Another really good place to get figures is YPN magazine, Your Property Network magazine.
Oh yeah,
all of their case studies.
You did a load of things that I've kept. Though, are you still doing?
I've got loads of articles. I've got one coming out in the April edition, actually.
They're amazing. You literally took it. You literally broke it down. They were so valuable. I've got my pile of YPN magazine.
Yeah, I've got breakdowns. The one in April doesn't talk about figures so much because it's a slightly different context. But not just my case studies, other property investors' case studies. And you'll see their figures. Read the articles because some of them will say, "Oh, I did all of the work myself, and these are only the materials." So read and understand, but you'll get some comparables from that. It's very easy to find material prices. You can find them all over the internet. So of course, that's a really good place to start. It's a little bit harder to sort out labour prices, but even that, with a little bit of thought, if you know that tradesmen in a lot of areas are now earning about £250 a day or so, maybe a little £300 in the more expensive parts, and so it's like, well, how long might it take someone to paint this room? Well, I think, if I did it myself, it would take me 3 days. So perhaps a painter's going to do it in 2 days because they're faster. Oh, well, there we go. That's about £600 then. Is it 600? Is it 650? Is it 700? It doesn't matter because we're in the right kind of ballpark place. But my thoughts here are that if you take some time to learn how to do your own budgets, then you're not reliant on other people. You're not reliant on taking a builder around there at the weekend, by which point someone else has already made an offer on the property. Yeah, and what I would say is think about it from this perspective. If you could go and look at a property at 10 o'clock in the morning, pop round the corner to the coffee shop, sit there, put some numbers together, maybe on the back of an envelope if that's what you want, or in Excel if that's how you want to operate, by 12 o'clock, you are in a position where you can say, actually, this deal is never going to work. We are miles away, or I can't get from it what I want, or we're in a position where we're saying, actually, this looks like it's something I need to spend some more time on. I've got these figures. You might even make an offer based around those figures. And then if the offer's accepted, then you might say, right, now's the time to perhaps spend a little bit more money with someone to verify my numbers. Or maybe I'm going to now talk to the architect to see that my idea of a layout is going to work, or I'm going to talk to a planning consultant and be 100% sure that, or have much more certainty that I'm going to get my planning. But I would encourage, run these high level numbers to know if it's worth spending more time on it. Because I talk to so many property investors that have spent weeks or months getting excited about a project that is just never going to work and never going to stack up because they've never really run the numbers. They already know what colour they're painting the walls, but they've not run the numbers to work out whether it's a viable property to do it.
Amazing. And another one, just out of interest. So obviously there's big stuff going on around EPCs and that kind of thing. And obviously you can look them up on, so I use EPC registers a lot as far as looking at sizes of properties, because the blooming estate agents are so lazy, they can't even be bothered to tell you how big the property is. So with EPCs, it also gives you obviously their kind of feedback of what they think it would cost to put that up to the standard of getting it to, say, a C. Do you believe those? Is that a tangible thing that people can look at? Do you think that's also somewhere to have a look for those kind of figures?
Yeah, the figures, I'm finding the figures are a bit out of date now. I think the other challenge is some of the work they recommend you could do is often not the most practical. And certainly the order that they put them in the EPC is not the most practical either. And for instance, a number of years ago, I bought an HMO, which it actually had a G rating when we bought it. So not just fail, it was below fail. And the most important thing on there was listed as about number 6 as the recommended improvements was a central heating system. Now, actually, by putting a central heating system in it, we got it up to E rating, which then meant at least that, I mean, whilst as an HMO you can rent it anyway, you just have to have an EPC. At least it was then up to an E rating. And whereas other things they were recommending would have meant us moving tenants out to do significant work in their rooms. Well, that wasn't practical. So EPCs are great. EPCs, by the way, are going to massively improve this year. The calculations are going to change this year. We're going to get a lot better credit. We're going to get better credit for the new electric products that are on the market now. So that's going to help us all out generally as far as EPCs go. But a lot of the people that are doing the EPC calculations are really only filling out an online form. And the online form is generating information that is very, very generic, based on very generic figures, very generic information that's been put into a central computer. And it's not really totally relevant for your own individual property. Some of those surveyors have got experience and can give you a little bit more information, but most of them are, it's not much more than an admin role, effectively, is what I'm saying here. Yeah. And I don't want to do EPC surveyors a disservice, because they've done some training. They've definitely got training and qualifications, but they're not super technical.
Fantastic. And then, in fact, Ken has added in a question which kind of I'll tie into the next one. So we've looked at the appraisal, so that's great. So we've got breaking it down into chunks. That's incredibly useful. Really comparing. You've given some resources. They can come and see you. They can go to YPN. Lots of those things. Then it's creating a real detailed schedule of works, which you'll share with some builders, and then they're going to make a comparison. And then you've said the best and the right builder. So Ken said, this is one of my main concerns, finding the right builder, especially if I'm buying outside of my area. So that would be amazing to sort of touch on that. As you said, I loved your description that if you just don't get on with them and you feel like, strangling them at the end of a 5-minute conversation or just walking around the house, maybe they're not somebody that you would work with. So what would you advise there for that?
So yeah, I think the thing is, the way to get good builders is you must start with a long list of builders. You need to create a long list, and you need to be critical and get rid of the ones that aren't right. Too many people I meet have spoken to 2 builders. One of them hasn't priced, so they're left with the other one. And that's not where you want to be. So to create a long list, good ways of getting lists of builders is a really good way. It's just walking around the streets where you are. Not so easy if you're investing out of area, but look for other builders that are working locally. Look for the sign written bans that are outside properties. And if you can walk around the streets locally and meet those builders, you'll talk to some of them. And builders are normally they're pretty helpful, they're pretty friendly, and they're pretty proud of what they're doing. And so some of those builders will invite you into the property, and they'll say, come in and we'll show you what we're doing. And if you walk in that property and it looks well organised and well run and reasonably tidy within a building site's parameters, that's a good sign. Whereas if you walk in and you think, there's radio blare and everyone's shouting, no one seems to be in control, you think you could be killed any minute, then that is the builder to strike off the list. It's not even a builder that, well, maybe we'll get a price and see what it looks like. Take them off the list. I've taken builders off the list because they've not turned up to appointments on time. If they can't meet me on time, I don't mind someone who's late and texts me and say, I've got stuck in traffic, or can we rearrange? Those things happen. If someone doesn't turn up a couple of times, that's not a good sign. So I would just take them off the list. That's a builder for me.
That's an amazing one. We had a builder who came and he really, he kept badgering me. He really said that he wanted the job. Anyway, he rocked up, and taking into consideration that it's a 5-story building, he was there for 20 minutes. And during those 20 minutes, he answered 5 calls. So that was how interested he was. And then he literally gave this blanket. He wasn't willing to sort of break it down. He just gave a blanket price, and that was it. And it was kind of like, oh, so I think we'll be using you then.
That's it. It's that kind of thing that you're looking for. You don't necessarily need to be in a property for a lot of time, but I've turned up, met with builders. I mean, I've met hundreds of builders in my career. But, where they turn up and they say, well, what do you want me to do then? And it's like, well, I sent you the schedule of works last week. And then they walk around and they say, oh, I need to bring my electrician back next week. And it's like, what, you want me to give up more of my time because you weren't on the ball in the first place and reading the schedule, realising that you needed your electrician. So again, so be critical and eliminate the builders that aren't right for you. If you're investing out of town, Ken, you are going to have to rely on Google. You're going to need to be on the internet, Googling builders in your town. Now, when you Google builders, you're going to find all sorts. You're going to find those with the good SEO, the good search engine optimization. They're the big companies. They may well be too big for your project. Look at their address. If they've got the swanky office in the high street, they're probably not the builder for your smaller kind of property investment type property. But you will find websites on there for some basic websites for smaller local builders. But just because they're on the internet, that doesn't mean they're a good builder. They're just a builder to put onto your short list, a builder to do some more research and due diligence into. You're going to find some directory sites like the old-fashioned yellow pages. There's sites on the internet that will give you links to those other builders. Some of those have got testimonials, but be cautious of testimonials. They can be 10 years old. They can be written by the builder's mum, sister, and gran, just to get them on the platform. So still do your own research and due diligence. And then you're also going to find some of these platforms like Rated People, where you put a bit more information about your project on, and those companies actually then charge builders for the lead. Now, the builders that take those leads are much more likely to price because they've paid for the lead. 50, 60 pounds or so those leads are going to cost them. So they're more likely to pay for them. But the thing to remember with all of those platforms is the platforms themselves don't do massive amounts of due diligence and research into the contractors. When I had my own business, I set my business up really at, what was it? It was the beginning of March, and by the middle of May, I'd got my first project on site. And I got my early projects from being on those platforms. And it surprised me how easy it was to get on. I mean, it was pretty much, are you alive? And you tell me you've done some building work in the past, you're on the list. Now, I mean, I'd got 20-something years experience. I'd got a degree in quantity surveying, so I knew I was kosher. But the thing here is they're not necessarily checking everything. The key thing is, wherever you get from, even if your best friend recommends a builder, you must still do some research. And you must get rid of the ones that are the wrong builders for you. Maybe they're too big, maybe they're in the wrong area, maybe they're too small. A man and his mate might be ideal if you're just going to refurbish, a one-bedroom flat, but they're not the people to take a 6-story house and convert it into flats, because you will still be there Christmas 2024 with him and his mate trying to do everything on their own. So be critical about the builders that you're engaging with and look for any reason to take them off the list. They might be ideal for you on the next one, so keep in touch with them, but just take them off the list if they're not right for this particular one.
Amazing. Look, I'm really aware of time, and I have got a couple more questions that I really wanted to cover off today. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, there's 3 of them, I'll let you know. So one of them is obviously just the final point, managing the property. The project, sorry. The second one is a real, I know it's a dear to your heart, and I think it's so important, is safety. And then the third one is not knowing what you don't know, and I wanted to give an example of that. So if we might try and cover those off, and we have got a couple more questions. Well, Ken, so Ken is very grateful. He said very good advice with a long list of builders and whittling them down. So yeah, just with regards to managing the property, just a bit of sort of advice on that would be amazing.
So managing the project, if you've got the right budget in the first place, and you've appointed the right builder using a quality schedule of works, managing the building works itself is relatively easy. The projects that I manage, or the projects I manage with my team, we aim to go to each project once a week. We're not inundated with phone calls saying, what do you want here and what should I do here? And it's not, I don't know, because we've got a good schedule of works. And because we've appointed the right builder and we've made sure that the builder has understood what we're wanting them to deliver, we're not on the back foot. We still get our challenges. You know, the property a few years ago where the builder phones up and says, I've started digging the foundations and we found a well. You're always going to get those kinds of issues, and you can't legislate for that. That's what we have contingencies for. What I don't want is builders phoning me every 5 minutes with questions, because if they're doing that, then it means that part of the process has broken down. I've not written a good schedule of works, or the builder hasn't understood what I need. So I encourage all of my clients to actually spend a good amount of time planning and preparing their project. Yes, time is important. We all want to get started. We want, we're on bridging finance and expensive things that we're not going to recover from until we've got our tenants in there or our guests staying. But I would encourage everyone to spend 2 weeks longer up front. It will save you 6 weeks at the back end, and it will give you much better control, because the day the builder starts working on site should be the time where you've now got time back again to go and find your next deal, to sort out your business, to go and find finance or whatever you need to do. So get your head involved in the project in depth for 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, whatever it needs to get it right, get the builder on site, manage them, go once a week, keep an eye on what they're doing, and don't overmanage. The right builder doesn't need overmanaging. If you think you've got to be there more than once a week, then unfortunately you've probably got the wrong builder or a poor quality schedule of works in the first place.
Amazing. Fantastic feedback there. Fantastic feedback. Love that. So let's touch next on safety. So obviously, again, this is a huge one, and something that, certainly with our project, there was a lot of learning for me. Gosh, the amount of paperwork, my VA and I were just banging out all this various paperwork. So yeah, can we just touch on that? Because obviously, again, and I think we need to really reiterate this, with this taking full responsibility, it is, if I'm correct in sharing, is our responsibility, isn't it? So I wonder if you might just touch on that briefly.
Yeah, absolutely. So the health and safety, the safe delivery of your project falls under what we call the CDM regulations. CDM stands for Construction Design Management. The letters are actually in slightly the wrong order, because it basically means we've got to design our buildings in a way that they are safe to build and safe to live in. We've got to construct our buildings safely, and that's, of course, the biggest element in here of risk. And we've also got to consider the safe ongoing management of our buildings. How do we change the light bulb without someone falling down the staircase? Simple things like that. So from a construction perspective, that is the biggest element and the biggest risk of all of those. Significantly, all of those, ultimately, the responsibility rests with the building owner and cannot be properly delegated to anyone else. And it certainly cannot be delegated to a building contractor. Now, the key thing here is, as a building owner, unless you have got experience and qualifications in the management of health and safety, the only person that can help you is a health and safety consultant, who will effectively be your right-hand person to guide you through the legislation and help ensure that you are employing the right contractor that has the right credentials and can demonstrate that they can carry out the work safely, and then subsequently does carry out that work safely. And so a lot of people say to me, but this is going to cost me money. And I'm going to say, yes, it's going to cost you £2,000, £3,000. And if you can't afford it, then that's because you didn't do the appraisal properly in the first place and put the line item in for your health and safety consultant at £3,000. Because unfortunately, or in the worst thing that can happen on your project, by the way, the worst thing is that someone's killed whilst it's being done. And if that happens, the health and safety executive are down there, they close your site down, and the first thing they say is, who is responsible? Well, there's only two parties that they'll start talking to. You, the building owner, and normally the owner of the building business themselves. And then they'll start to look to apportion blame. Now, if the building business has done something wrong, then they will definitely carry the can. But the health and safety executive will always look at you and say, well, how did you know the building business could do it right in the first place? And if you said, well, he told me, they'll say, well, where's your experience? Where's your evidence that they showed you they could do it right in the first place? So get yourself a CDM health and safety consultant is what I'm saying. There's no way around it. And there's no shortcut. And ultimately, it's like an insurance policy. Like an insurance policy on your car, you never want to be phoning the insurance company up, but the day you do drive into that brick wall, you know that it's there and they'll look after you and they'll fix your car. And it's exactly the same with health and safety. You don't ever want to be using your health and safety consultant, but the day something goes wrong, they're there, and ultimately they'll keep you out of prison, because that's the worst thing that can happen. Yeah,
we certainly don't want to be doing that. So I think, I really want to make sure we covered off on that, because I think it is so key. And I think a lot of us, naively go in, and as again, it goes back to segueing into you don't know what you don't know. So I wanted to just touch on a thing that actually came up while listening to Dan Hill's podcast. There was guys that were doing some flat conversions. And it sounded like they had everything going through correctly. They brought in building control, they had an architect, a designer. Anyway, when it came to the end, suddenly it was brought up. I mean, there was carpets on the floor, everything it was weeks away from being completed, and suddenly it was like, oh well, in your in the stairwell there isn't a 2-meter clearance. So where obviously they were very sensible, and they just, there wasn't like loads of blame up front, which, that may have come down the line later, but it was like, what can we do right now to mend this? But, there's so many things that we don't know. So how can something like that have been, addressed, so to speak?
Well, it's interesting. What's really spooky here is I listened to that podcast this morning when I went out for a walk, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Fantastic.
Practically said exactly the same as the two guys did. Now, it was interesting because I was listening to that this morning and I was thinking, what might have gone wrong here? They've appointed an architect who seems to have somehow missed the fact that this staircase is non-compliant. They said that they'd spoken to their builder about it, and builder had spoken to building control about it. But what I took away from that was what was missing was it had been delegated to someone else. And actually, the buck stops with the two at the top. The two directors of the business thought they delegated it down the line, and they probably hadn't pushed it hard enough. And I was thinking, had they appointed me as project manager, what might I have done? And some people say to me, we don't want to open up a can of worms, Martin, don't say anything. And if my client doesn't want me to say anything, that's fine. But I think I would have had that out on the table very early on. As soon as it came to light that there was a potential problem, I would have been having the conversation. Because yes, there might be a cost to rectify it, but the cost of rectifying that problem in week 3 of the job is way, way less than it was for these two guys who, as you say, had got the carpet down and the walls painted, and then they had to modify this staircase, and there seems to be something to do with the electric services in there. that cause the problem. And is what you've been saying, Emma. You cannot delegate this stuff. You've got to take responsibility for it. The projects that are successful are the ones which are managed properly from the beginning, not looking at cutting corners and aiming not to miss things out. Of course, as you say, there's so much. If you don't know, you don't know. And that's why I've got my 83-point checklist, with a view that if I go through my checklist, things won't go wrong. And sadly, people say to me, Martin, I had this problem. Aren't I really clever? Look how I solved it. It didn't cost me much money. And I'm thinking, yeah, but had you worked on my checklist, you'd have realised that at point 4, you'd have done this. And so you'd have never had the problem. I do some monitoring surveying work for one of the banks. And they sent me a client's contract with his builder. And there was a gap in the contract. There was a bit that just didn't make sense. I got hold of the developer and I asked him some questions and said, let me know what you want to do. And he came back to me a week later and he said, it's all right. I've got someone to design that and get that problem sorted out. And I'm thinking, that's all right. That has solved the problem. Except, had he been working with me in the first place, and he couldn't because there was obviously a conflict of interest here, he didn't even need to pay for it. There is a free way of solving the problem he had, but because he didn't know it, he'd gone and paid someone to solve the problem because he didn't know what he didn't know. And that's really what I'm all about. The more people I talk to, the more seeds I can sow, the more little gems I can give away to help people save money. And of course, because I was working for building contractors for so long, I know how building contractors make their money. And I also know how to still work with them fairly and equitably without giving them the opportunity of making additional money from us now on the other side as property investors. And that's what I'm all about.
Amazing, amazing. Look, I can see we've come over, but we've gone over the time, but we've got one more question from Michelle. She said, are the materials and labour figures significantly different between North and South?
Well, a really good question. So yes is the short answer. Labour significantly, although watch some of the northern cities, because you know at the moment there's a bit of a booming market in in Leicester and Nottingham and what have you. Manchester and Liverpool have been booming for a good few years, but labour you will definitely see the change across the country. You won't see quite as much on the material side of things, but material, of course, as with anything, all of this comes back to economics. It comes down to supply and demand. If your local builder's merchant aren't selling many bricks, they'll do a bit of a deal on bricks to try and get some out the door. So, and in fact, this is the side of the work I'm doing with Dan Hill, the training I do with Dan Hill. It's the economic side of things that is actually quite exciting, because you see what's going on in the economy and what it's doing to the market, as far as clients go, as far as building goes, as far as as far as property values and rental rates and things like that go.
Amazing, amazing. Martin, you are an absolute superstar. We could clearly talk for hours and hours and hours about this. Yes. It's absolutely amazing, but we've literally just touched on it now, and I'm aware that it is an hour-long program here today. Thank you. And guys, if you found this useful, please do click on and follow myself and Martin here. We've given you a link for Martin's book. He's already mentioned that you can go and find him on YouTube, Facebook. If you look up Refurb Mastery, let's go and support him, because I really feel he's given some absolutely incredible value here today. And if you have a project that they want you to help with, you mentioned like a couple of hours, how would they contact you? Would that be through Facebook?
Yeah. No, easiest way of getting hold of me is go to the website, which is refurbishmentmastery.com. There's a button at the top of the screen that says book a call. Just book the free 20-minute call with me. It will come straight into my diary. Then I'll know that someone wants to talk to me. I'm probably booked up all of this week, but you should find some slots later next week. And that's the easiest way of getting hold of me. But you will find me on Facebook, and I'll reply on Facebook as well. if you want to track me down on there. So yeah, I'm here to help people really, and I get a little bit frustrated when I see people struggling for the want of asking a question. And you know, and I'm not all about. I mean, I do need to make a living out of this, but I will help people for free as long as you know, as long as you look after me.
Yeah, exactly. Make sure you value. I always think this. You know, when you come across that you do help an awful lot of people, but they have to be respectful and value your time as well, and that's where you must value your time, because otherwise the more you value the time, the more you help people you can help as well. So and just a final one, I don't so you I know that we haven't touched on, sorry, is your refurbishment mastery, that sorry, your project management accelerator program. Do you want to just very briefly touch on that before we sign off?
Yeah, so again, if you go to the same website, there's a link at the bottom about the Project Management Accelerator Program. This is a community. It's a community that I've been building and growing. There's now over 200 members of the community. It primarily focuses around having access to me to ask questions on a regular basis. Just like we've had conversations and we've had some questions today. I've got a closed Facebook group. I do Zoom calls on a Friday morning, and I answer all of the questions that have come up during the week from my community. And my mindset, although I've got training videos and you get access to training videos as well, the mindset is, you know, you can go to a training course, you can listen and learn, but you've forgotten it by the time you need it. The whole idea of the community is the day it comes up. I went to see a property yesterday, Martin, and I saw this. Here's a photo. Can you tell me what it is, how to fix it, what it might cost? You'll have that answer on a Friday. I do that every single Friday. So that's what the community is all about. You'll find the full details at the bottom of the website. And you know, you literally pay a one-off fee. You're in for life. So you know, even if you haven't got a project going straight away, but I'd encourage people to come in before they've even bought properties to make sure they understand what they're buying, how to fix things, are they working to the best layouts and things like that. So all the details are on the website. On that website, you'll find how to book a call with me, details of the handbook, and also details of the accelerator program. So yeah, here to help.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Martin. You're an absolute superstar. I really appreciate that. So guys, obviously you can listen to this on replay, so please do share it with anyone else who you think might find it useful. And then it is, as I say, this is on a Facebook Live under my Emma Howitt Pure Abodes page, and then also this afternoon it should be up onto YouTube, again, Emma Howitt Pure Abodes. And then as the week progresses, we break it down into what I call short longs, slightly shorter videos, which just literally answer the questions that I've asked you, Martin. So those are great as well to add out and share amongst the community. So again, Martin, so appreciate you being here. You're an absolute superstar. Yeah, I really respect your work, and yeah, you offer so much out. And you're very, very generous. So I can see we've had a lot of people saying thank you so much. So again, yeah, thank you again. So I'm going to end the room now, guys. But yeah, so next week we are back, and next week we'll be networking, and we're just going to be looking at deals. And so if you have any deals that you want to have a chat through, I was going to bring a couple, and I think some of the property graduate fellows are also going to join us. So yeah, join us next week, and then after that it's a couple of weeks of holidays, so we'll be taking a break to spend time with the family, and then we'll be back after that with a new schedule for the second quarter, because as we all know, we need to I run by quarters. Okay guys, thanks so much. Take care, see you very soon.
Thanks, Em. Bye.
Bye, take care.